my philosophy about how to coach has been pretty consistent. But I yelled more when I was younger because that's the model of coaching that a lot of us are exposed to. And I was a young coach, and I wanted everybody in the stands to know that I knew what was going on. As an older coach, I can say now, most of the time when you're yelling at a kid on the field, it has nothing to do with trying to fix what the kid did. If we're honest with ourselves, you're yelling at the kid to tell everybody in the stands that you taught him better. That's what it comes down to. And if your ego doesn't get in the way and you're honest with yourself, that's why you're yelling at that kid, is to let everybody know we've covered this, right? It's not my fault. You're throwing a 10-year-old under the bus, you know? And so I was playing a game where a guy was just screaming. It's a high school game. He was just screaming at his team. And I had this epiphany that, you know, thinking about why do people do that? And coming to that realization that that's part of the reason that I had done it myself. I believe if you're a great coach, you're a quiet coach. Doesn't mean everybody has to be the same. But people will say he never coaches the kids. I think that's a compliment, because that probably means you're in the dugout with your arm around a kid talking to him and trying to fix something and help him be successful, instead of trying to let the parents know that you know what you're doing, right? Your coaching should happen in the dugout. You can scream to a kid, is what I tell people. Don't scream at a kid, okay? And I think that's one of the biggest things that I hope that people will take away, and just sort of think about that in your own coaching and find out where you are on that spectrum. But I think that's critical. Thank you guys for being here, first of all, but also, as I said to the other group, I know how valuable it is to have people volunteer their time. You know, I've done this through NYS Youth Sports, where I'm doing it for free. And I've done it at the high school level, where I'm doing it mostly for free. And so I appreciate the time you guys put in. It's huge, and these kids need these kinds of programs. I'm not trying to badmouth competitive, because I think there are some great advantages in competitive as well. But my own personal philosophy as a guy who's coached at the high school level is that the pendulum has swung a little too far that direction. That we're charging kids an awful lot of money. We're playing a ton of games with the idea that more games is better. And that's not always the case, especially for overhead athletes. And I think the numbers of shoulder and elbow surgeries that we're having in kids younger than ever before suggest that maybe we need to back off a little bit about what we think is a reasonable number of games. So I think it's critical that we have these programs. The other thing is, I tell people all the time when we have teams come here who've never been here, you guys have probably experienced this before, and they see these fields, and it's like Field of Dreams back here. Having an opportunity for kids to come and play near their home on fields like these, just don't take it for granted, because it does not happen very often. You've got kids traveling to different cities to play on teams, and so this is a great opportunity for them. So thank you guys for being a part of making that available to them. I'm going to try to go through, we try to break this down into a couple of things that I would suggest to you that if you're not already doing, that you might consider. I'm not here to tell you, hey, I've got it all figured out at all. In fact, one of the things I'm going to talk to you about is not letting your ego get in the way of becoming a better coach every single year. And so I'm throwing it out there. You know, if a lot of it you already know, if you know something better, that's great, and pass that along to me or whatever. But I'm certainly not coming at this from the perspective of let me tell you how you should do stuff. I'm just throwing some stuff out there for your consideration, okay? First, general philosophies. I believe this at all levels. It's the doctor's oath. First, do no harm. Our responsibility is to take care of these athletes so that they can play at the high school level or college level without chronic injuries that are going to make it difficult for them to be successful. As I said before, we have more surgeries than ever before on younger and younger kids. We also have an awful lot of burnout from kids who are playing so many games that by the time they get to college, they work all that time, they get a scholarship to a college to go play, and they say, you know what, I'm tired of playing softball 5 days a week. I'm done with it. When we have kids who don't stick in a program, it's almost always because they're burned out, not because they lack the skill set, they can't keep up in school or anything like that. They're just kind of done with it at that point. So those two things, fueling their interest in the game and making sure that you take care of their arms and you're attentive to that, that you know about pitch counts. You know, one of the things that drives me crazy is LBL's got a pitch count based on innings. You guys have coached long enough to know what an inning looks like one day and the next day, or one inning and the next inning sometimes, right? As Alan used to say, you got a kid who's throwing a ball everywhere you want it one inning, and then he can't throw a rock in the ocean the second inning, right? And that happens all the time. But we count innings instead of pitches in a lot of these leagues. I would urge you to be more responsible than that, even if your league is giving you permission not to be, to know what a reasonable number of pitches is, to know how much rest these kids need, and not let a victory get in the way of that kid's long-term health to continue playing this game. So teach the game. We talk about this, and even with the older groups, I still think this is a big one. My first responsibility is to make a play on the ball. I'm waiting for the ball to be hit to me. I take my prep steps and I'm ready for the ball. If it's not hit to me and I'm in the infield, my second responsibility is to think about whether I need to be at my base right away. Ball's not hit to me. What's my responsibility to base? I don't have a kid who didn't know to be over at third base, so we had an option on a ball, little bleeder hit to the right side of the field, right? Third, that they have a backup. And I'm going to tell you right now, if kids go up to the high school level and I see a kid who knows, backing up over here is one thing, but if I see that there's a throw over to third on a kid who's stealing and my left fielder's moving into a backup position, those kids are going to jump off the page to high school coaches. Those kids who know those things. So fight for those little things, reward and encourage kids who you see doing that. Shout out to them, let them know when they come into the dugout. Notice that as much as you do how many hits they got in a day, because that's part of what we're trying to encourage them to do. That's usually what's going to get a kid noticed at the high school level. Does he know what to do on a read play? Is that a read play? Is that a tag play? Right? Does he know the game? So that leads to that idea of we want to make sure that they understand the game at all positions. Sometimes as they get older, we talk ourselves into believing that our success, the team's success, the individual kid's success is based on them playing in a position that they are best at, because that means our chances of winning are better. No specialists. I'm going to let Galen talk about the rule related to those innings. But one of the sheets I'm going to give you guys in just a little bit is we kept track of our innings of our kids in the infield and the outfield, and we ran a comp team through NYS Sports for the last 3 years. 5 years? Yeah. And we did the same philosophy there as we would encourage you guys to do with rec teams, which is rotate them all the time in the infield, rotate them all the time in the outfield, and make sure that they're not telling you that they're a first baseman. And because that's the kid who catches the ball best on your team doesn't mean it should be the kid who plays all of your innings at first base. That's a difficult thing for competitive former athletes to do. It's a difficult thing. But you have to give kids opportunities to get better and understand that our first responsibility is not to win games. Our first responsibility is to develop players at this age. This is sacrilegious. I'm going to tell you right now, if you're going to do this, you better tell your parents about it, because it's not going to look like what they've done before. We put kids in groups of 3, really good hitter, kind of mediocre hitter, and then a poor hitter. We would rotate them every game. So our top 3 group, game 1, is our middle 3 group, game 2, is our bottom 3 group, game 3. If you want to win every single game you can, you're probably not going to do your lineup that way. If you believe kids playing at this age need to be developed as players, then you might consider doing your lineup that way. If you consider that you guys do not practice 6 days a week like we do at the high school level, you have fewer opportunities to coach these kids, then maybe the game day lineup looks different on this team than it would if you were a high school coach. Because if I'm a high school coach, I'm not doing that, right? Varsity coach is not going to rotate those kids through. But I can tell you as a high school coach, once I get past my 5th hitter, it probably doesn't matter a whole heck of a lot where I hit them after that. But if you guys only have a couple of days a week that you're practicing or playing, their game at-bats matter more, right? At the end of a season, we'd play a 25, 30 game season. Those kids at the top of the lineup, who are my best hitters, are going to have 25 or 30 more hacks than the kids at the bottom of the lineup. That helps those kids for sure, but it doesn't probably develop those kids down below. If you believe your responsibility is to take the cream of the crop and make them better than they already were, then you're going to have a different philosophy. But my job, as I see it, is to make every single one of my players a little better than they were when I got them. And if you're going to do that, and I'm going to tell you right now, if you do this, you're going to have second thoughts about it, and you're going to feel like this is not the right thing to do. You know how hard it was for a high school coach to come down here and coach and say, I got to do this differently because I don't have them 6 days a week. When everything I had been doing before was totally different. Old school baseball, right? Best hitter in the 3-hole, right? Put the kid with the wheels up there and 1, and you got to rotate these guys through, and you got a kid who's one of your slowest runners in that top part of the lineup. It's going to be saying, you're going to be hearing yourself saying, I shouldn't be doing it this way. What I can tell you is we played in the LBL league that keeps all the stats about run differential and everything else. We played tournaments. We had the highest run differential the last 3 years that we played in the league. So it worked because we had the same group of kids for the most part. We'd change out 2 or 3 kids a season who moved on or moved out of the state or whatever. Those other kids generated more runs against their opponents as a team than anybody else in the league, right? And that was not my goal. But to see that happen, even though we were switching them up, I think is proof that they're all getting better. The other thing is you're not going to have nearly as many problems with parents complaining about stuff if they feel like their kids have an even opportunity. Not exactly the same number of at-bats, not the exact same number of innings, but they're all contributing to that team instead of everybody just sort of standing around watching one or two kids kind of carry the team. That's a huge one, you guys, and I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to see it very many places. There were times that we had to talk ourselves into doing it in games or tournaments. We're like, doggone it, is that the best infield we could put together? We're in the championship game, And we were really close a lot of times to saying, oh, just this one game, right? Just this one game. And then it gets easier to do it again and again. And lo and behold, I'm telling you, the times we put our infield out there where we thought, God, these guys got no business being our starting infield, we'd win. You know how that goes, right? We give ourselves way too much credit as coaches sometimes. Focus on fundamentals. Cover less, especially with the younger kids. Don't try to cover everything. Don't worry about being the only team that has bunt coverages or first and third defenses. If you do pick something like that as you start to move up, just start with one thing. I mean, honestly, pick one play that the kids know and then move through it. But for you guys, I think it's more fundamentals of the things we're going to cover here in just a minute. And I wouldn't do more than about 2 or 3 things in each skill area that the kids hear over and over and over. It's supposed to be, 1,000 times? Kid has to hear something at that age before they really internalize it. So get started on the 1,000 right now. Pitching, I'm just going to go through this really quickly because most of you guys, I think, will probably wind up seeing Fisher's thing. Balance. We want kids to come up and hold for a 3 count, okay? Most of them can't do that. They come up, they start falling backwards, they fall this direction. If I'm already falling before I deliver the pitch, things are not going to probably go very well. So I would get those kids in a position where they just do this at home all the time. Come set, bring my hands together, come set, just lift that leg up and sit still, okay? And get them to do that until they can do it on a regular basis. 2, foot lands at 2 o'clock. My front foot, most kids are going to land at 12 or even 11 on the clock. So they're falling over the back, right? We want them to come down when they land, and they break their hands and they land. We want this foot pointing at 2 o'clock. 1, for balance, and 2, there's a reason pitchers lift their lower half, right? And if I step open, I lose my lower half. I can't pull anymore, right? The toe. So we want them on a straight line to the target, but that toe is going to be on that straight line at 2 o'clock. Good question. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so if I'm throwing to home here, here's my straight line, right? My foot's going to come down on my straight line, but it's going to be pointed at 2. Now Fisher will talk about this stuff probably later. If I'm throwing an outside pitch, I might be here on that line. If I'm throwing an inside pitch, I might be here on that line. But I'm staying on that line, right? Around that line. But 2 o'clock is important for this. Most of them are going to finish with a little bit of pivot. It's going to be closer to 12, right? But I don't have any hips left if I don't land that way balanced. The other thing is, remember, we're dropping and driving. We want this to stop, right? Abruptly. We want that snap. We don't get that if we don't close down that front side at 2 o'clock like that. Breaking hands. Thumbs down, Fisher's going to talk about doing this. But at the younger ages, I think once these kids are set, if my thumbs go from this position down, it gets them into the position of here's my elbow and this one's going up to my ear, okay? Just like this. But my thumbs go down, and that brings me in the elbow position and right up into this 45 that we were talking about. Front elbow against sight 45, follow through and hold. This is huge. Fisher now says chase glove with your chest. I think I said that to you earlier. So when they finish, I think holding that position is a really, really important thing for them to do. That long finish is going to take care of their arms, but it's also going to allow them to, we want a high initial position, right? And we want that follow through after so that we are throwing downhill. We do that for 2 reasons. 1, because throwing downhill means that the ball is more likely to stay down in the zone, correct? That's one reason. Functionally, it's harder to hit a baseball that changes planes. So not only is it going to prevent their elbows from blowing up if we're down here and all of that leverage is in on that elbow if we stay low, right? But if we get them up high and they finish here, if I get a high hand position and I throw a low pitch, kids have to track it down in that plane. And that's harder to hit than a ball that stays in the same plane the whole time. So that's the other advantage from being able to throw that way, trying to keep hitters from getting on you. Okay, first of all, Galen's going to grab a bat here. One of the things that we talk about all the time, and this is something Fisher used to talk to our hitters about too, is looking down the Y. So we used to call it the V, right, with our arms. Go ahead and just stop your hack there. But it looks like a lowercase y, really, right? The hands are leading the barrel here. And so it looks like a Y. His head should be right here all the time. And with younger hitters, this is the number one thing that they have to contend with. They almost always fly open on the front side, and the head goes with that shoulder. Especially young kids, their power comes from their hips. So they're going to be rotational hitters, right? More than anything else, they're going to be rotational hitters more than linear hitters. So this is a huge tendency from those guys too early in the swing. So we talk about looking down the Y. First of all, just make them sure that they're aware of it, and tell them to watch Nolan Arenado. I'm not sure that there's a guy who's better than burying his head on a pitch than Nolan Arenado is. Explains a lot of his success. But you cannot see his ear, is what I would tell the kids. I don't want to see your ear at contact. I want to see this. If I see your ear, you're in the wrong position, right? So we're looking for this. You shouldn't be able to see his face, never his ear there. Locked in on that spot. So a couple things I would encourage you guys to do there. First of all, when you're throwing a BP, we used to at the high school level have the kids just track pitches, just load and track the pitch, 3 of them, just to sort of get locked in visually, right, before they ever take a hack. Second, have them bunt 3, and it's kind of an old school thing, and I didn't used to love it, but what I like about it is it gets them tracking the ball still. All right, and then they swing away after that point. But it's just a reminder every single time they step up. Fellas, I'm not going to tell you today to stay locked on the ball, but we're going to track 3 and we're going to bunt 3 to stay locked on the ball. Okay? Second, hit to the right side. We had kids who could crush those years at NYWAT, and they would love to take BP before the game, and the opposing teams coming down the field. You guys been to NYWAT fields? And we got kids, righties, who were launching the ball onto the JV field. That was their big thing, is to hit it onto the JV field, right? They're coming out of their shoes in BP to do that. But their first round, those kids who can crush, was to the right side. So they go through 3 times as a group of 3 hitting. Their first time through, everything is between second and first. That's my goal. And then I try to hit stuff to the left side if I want to. But I'm trying to keep that shoulder in. I'm trying to keep my head on the ball and stay over the baseball to the right side before I begin. That's not real popular in the upper levels of this game these days, right? But that's what's going to help a lot of those kids who have that flying open problem. The other thing I love is that after they take the cut, we would say on tee work, always see the empty cone. So if you got one of these tees, after he swings and he takes his hack, his head stays there and he actually holds that for like a 2 count. He should be looking at that empty cup, okay? And the last one, and this is one of my favorites, take some of your baseballs and put numbers on them, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and just put it on a couple sides of the baseball. Toss it to the kid when you're doing soft toss and have him call out the number, all right? And so they're just random in the bucket. You grab one, you throw a 4, boom, he hits it and he yells out the number 4. It just gets them locked in that idea of seeing the ball, because they're really tracking that ball to try to read that number. It might be revolving a little bit, right? And they're trying to sort out what the number is. It just really enforces that idea. We do this a lot to players, right? If you can figure out a way to reinforce this with something they can actually do, it's a lot more effective, especially with younger kids, okay? The load. You guys, I think, are old enough, these guys should be loading. So one of the things we do at Silver Creek, Ryan Beavers has done this for years. When we do tee work, our kids load and hold, then they reset. And they load and hold a second time. And then they load and they go. They'll set the ball on the tee themselves. The other thing I love about this, kids get on tees, what do they tend to do? Whack, whack. It's like calisthenics, right? They want to get their heart rate up. It's not about having good hacks. And so this slows the whole thing down a little bit. Somebody sets the ball for them, they load, reset, and then load and go, kind of in rhythm. Okay, and again, just reinforcing that by having them do it as many times as I possibly can is part of our practice. And then the other thing on the load is watching for those drifting hands. So if you can get a parent, one of the things I love is to get them on coach's eye or something like that from the side, get them from this angle and watch their hands. A lot of these hitters, in anticipation of the ball, your young kids who can't hit the ball very hard anyway, right, give up half of their momentum by letting their hands creep to this position, and then they swing from there. So that load of getting their hands back, I think, is critical. You guys are older, so I'll tell you, old coaches of older kids, if you ever have the guys from Crush, anybody ever go to a Crush Clinic, KR Crush? They're from Arizona, former big leaguers. They teach this on your load. My hands are all the way back to darn near straight. This is sacrilege, old school baseball, right? That front arm's got to stay kind of in an L. It used to be L, and then they said move it back. These Crush guys say, It's like all the way back here so that I can bring that that bat from like Detroit, right, all the way through here and squash it. That's their philosophy. Hitting groups, this is a key one. A lot of times I'll go to practices and I'll see guys will have kids hit 12, 15 pitches, sometimes 20. Kids should never hit 20 pitches at one time, mostly because it leads to hitting fatigue, which leads to really bad habits. My hands start dropping, right, all that kind of stuff. I would put them in groups of 3 and I would rotate them through. The most ignored part of baseball, in my opinion, is throwing. And we have the kids warm up and play catch. They're down there all by themselves. We're doing our stuff in the dugout, right? And we got a lot of stuff to do. So I'm not saying we're just being lazy. But hardly anybody coaches kids throwing. Hardly anybody. Practices or games. If there's one thing I would tell you fundamentally to work on, it would be to have a coach down there playing catch with the kids or watching them and make sure that they've got their hand position, make sure they're pointing their elbow. A chicken wing that I talked about earlier, so I won't talk about it a whole lot, but they should be pinned tight to their body, right? They should be sucking that arm in. Most of them are not going to understand the relationship between this arm and this arm. It's going to be kind of this, you know what I mean? But ideally, it's supposed to be that, right? It's supposed to be yanking this in and pulling that arm down and across. So they'll start to pick up on it. They'll start to feel more comfortable. Keep insistent on that arm. Don't let them fall asleep on that arm. Follow through, especially for these kids pitching. Everything's off the plate. Almost always it's because they're throwing and they're coming across rotationally like this, right? And they're staying up tall. So the ball is up and off the plate. When they're bullpenning and they're not going to have a ball hit screaming back at them, every single time they finish, they should finish here, okay? If you watch the Rockies warming up with that big long arm, when all those guys are throwing, right, the arm's coming down and across their body, the outside of their thigh. We used to say chest over leg on that front leg, right? Your chest finishes over your leg. Roger Fisher, and I think a lot of you guys are going to go to his pitching clinic, he was a pitching coach for me at NYS. He was a head coach at Boulder High. He's phenomenal. You guys are lucky to have him do a clinic for you because he's absolutely fantastic. What I'll tell you he says is chase your glove with your chest. So here's my glove. I'm going to chase it with my chest, right, to that finished position. I like that way of explaining it to kids, right? So that finish, when we play catch warming up, we always start on a knee. I'm going to finish with my arm across that outside thigh, right? Just get them in the habit of doing that all the time. And when your pitchers are throwing and they're bullpenning and nobody's hitting it back at them, have them hold that position, right? Look like Tim Lincecum, just hanging out there for a second and then stand back up. But they should finish like that. These kids are so anxious to see if they threw a strike, right? That it's like this, kind of, right? So they have to have that long follow through, and that's going to take much better care of their arm too. So fielding, 3 Bs, I already talked about the base, ball first, then base, and then back up. The other thing with the kids, especially out here in NYS Youth Sports fields, we have these grass infields which are phenomenal. If you've never coached here, you'll find out this is the only place at this level that has a grass infield anywhere, right? The bad news is that Jim does such a good job and Bobby taking care of that grass that a lot of times the ball doesn't get out of it, right? These kids roll over on pitches, and your pitcher, if he's a pretty good athlete, is probably going to be making an awful lot of outs for you on the sides of the grass there. But I would encourage your kids to be super aggressive, and we coach what we call fast, slow, fast. I do that as an outfielders coach at Silver Creek too. I'm explosive to the ball, but when I get to the ball, I have to break down. Especially because kids at this age are going to run right over it. They're going to kick it. They might literally kick their gloves, right? So I'm coaching them to be explosive, to take their prep steps and then explode to the ball. But when they get to the ball, they have to slow down, take choppier, smaller steps and break down under control and then speed up through their throw, especially in the outfield, right? So fast, slow, fast. Fast to it, slow through it, and then fast again before I throw. But that first explosive step toward a ball, I think, is huge. You guys have a challenge because at the high school, it's almost impossible to get kids, right? Every single pitch when somebody's struggling, right? But I would tell you 2 things on prep steps. 1, make them do it even when they're mad about it. And I would have you make them do it forward. Most of the kids do their prep steps like this, laterally, right? They step to the side and they drop because it gets tiring doing that. Every kid I've seen who is explosive to the ball at any level always creeps forward. Under control, you're not falling over your toes or spilling over your toes, as we say, right? But I'm standing up straight, I'm relaxing, I'm taking a big full breath with my lungs wide open, and then I'm walking in and I'm stepping into my ready position. On the balls of my feet, ready to react immediately either direction. And suddenly this kid's a good infielder because he can react faster to the ball, put himself in a good position. Hands together. One of the things that kids struggle with the most, even at the high school level, is you got a lot of kids who will keep their hands in proximity, but they don't keep them close enough. The reason that it's huge, and part of the reason I love coaching softball, you can't screw around in softball, right? With our bases, if you don't have good footwork, kids are safe in softball. We joke about that all the time. The girls tease me. Baseball, man, you're a third baseman. You get one smoked at you. I mean, you can slap that glove a few times, right? You don't have time to do that in softball. So all of the footwork and handwork stuff starts to become more and more important as you guys have kids moving up to the higher levels. So to me, having those hands together is about being able to stuff the ball into the glove to find it. A lot of times younger coaches will talk to the kids about, being able to get it if it falls out of your, it's not about that, right? Think about the number of times it actually comes out of your glove. That's one benefit. But having my hands together so that I can get quicker to my load position to throw, and I can find the baseball as my hands travel to that load position without dropping it, that's the reason that we want their hands together. So I would suggest you tell the kids to get a tennis ball, show them how to do the drill where you just bounce a tennis ball kind of up higher, not ground balls, and have kids start approaching the ball and starting to cheat through it a little bit with their hands together so that they can step and throw the ball, okay? But having a tennis ball that they have to track with their eyes, tennis balls are really hard to grab a hold of just one hand. They're smaller, they're lighter, so it's easy to knock them away. They have to use both hands. So have them do that at home. We even did it out on the dirt fields at NYS. We just bring a bucket of tennis balls and throw them and have kids move through left side infielders, moving through the ball to be able to throw it right away, okay? The other thing I would suggest you do is grab a bucket, sit on a bucket and have kids move through a line where you just toss them a ball underhand and they receive it with both hands and then throw it to a base. No gloves on, right? Just throwing it to them like that. Then you can have them put their gloves on after they've done it with their bare hands, and that starts to feel more comfortable. And then the last one is we used to hit grounders to our kids. You guys have probably seen those training paddles, right? Where they have to use the hand to trap it. And that's great. Those are fine too, but bare hands, they have to use it. They have to stay low through the ball. I like all of those things. So if you're afraid to hit them to your kids, just roll them. And you guys can scoot back and have them in the dirt and just roll them some ground balls where they field a couple times through with their bare hands before they put their gloves on. I would do that routinely. Don't do it just once and say, hey, it's important to keep your hands together. Do it a few times so that they start, just like hitting to the right side to try to keep myself closed, start with bare hands so that I remember to keep my hands together, okay? Turn hips and stick a foot in the ground. Almost always, at any level, if a kid throws a ball away, it's because of this, right? It's because of the bottom half. It's not usually the top half that causes a kid to throw a ball away. They pick up a ball, they're panicked, their hips are squared to their target, they throw it like this, right? And then that's not a natural motion. So a pitcher panics and picks up the ball, we want him to still reset his feet. Now, at the upper levels, you'll teach kids to step across and gain ground. I hated this. This always felt awkward to me. And if you watch a lot of the players at the upper level, Fisher and I watched a bunch of guys to see, we had an argument about whether it should be here or behind. A lot of the major league players will gain ground behind, okay? So they step behind as they turn their hips. Feel the ball and then step behind as they get ready to throw. If you want to teach kids to do this, it doesn't matter. But I think the most important thing is that they get some weight on that leg. At your level, I think it's just, we said stick a foot in the ground, which means put some weight on that foot, stick it in the ground. So I'm going to pick up my foot and I'm going to, even if my foot's in the right position, my hip's already facing my target, I still want to push off that foot, right? So we would teach the kids to just pick that foot up just a little bit, enough to put that weight on it. Just pick it up, stick it in the ground, and then push off and throw. And then it feels natural, they're less likely to throw the ball away. That's another huge one for throwing, fielding. Practices, warm up. A lot of times I see teams warming up. We play in softball. These are people who've been coaching a lot of times for a lot of years, and we'll go to their place, they'll warm up and have their kids throw. And even at the high school level, I'll see kids come down from one of the high schools we play pretty close by. The kids will come down and 2 or 3 of them will go out there and start throwing. And then the other people come down and start throwing, and they don't go out there as a team and start. First of all, I would encourage you, if you don't do that, to make sure everybody's starting at the same time. So you actually are keeping track of how long they're warming up. Almost all of them are going to shortchange it, right? And so if you believe in watching them and warming up for an appropriate amount of time, I think just give some attention to that. And then I'll come back to the model of the stretches in just a minute here. But I would suggest that you hit, if you're going to warm up before you guys play, you don't take infields, right? If you're warming up and kids are hitting into net, they're hitting heavy balls, whatever they're doing, they're hitting over in the cages. Have them hit first. If you don't already do this, have them warm up their arms right before they use their arms. And a lot of people don't really think about it from that perspective. But we're not playing catch to get dialed in, right? We're playing catch mostly to get this mechanism loose and ready to perform. It doesn't make any sense to do that and then sit for a half an hour before they use it. And so this should happen right before game time, right before you play. And I would suggest, if you can run a fungo on the grass over here after everybody's warmed up just to keep everybody loose, that you do that. But warm up throwing right before you're actually going to have kids throw. So that dynamic stretch thing there, you don't do all those. Notice how some of them are doubled up like 2s and 3s. You pick one of the 2s, you pick one of the 3s on a given day. Show them to the kids and let the kids do that on their own. You don't need to necessarily supervise it. Make sure they're not totally jacking around. A lot of them on skips, for instance, you know, they're gonna go like this, right? The point of a skip is that they're supposed to be like skipping with their knee up high to stretch everything out. Just make sure they're doing it right, but once the kids know it, you should say, oh, stretch, send them down the line and let them do these. This replaces the whole sort of circle up stretch. This is supposed to prevent injury. Not all of these guys are blowing out hammies at their age probably, but they're gonna sit around and talk and not stretch. So this way they can talk a little bit, but it forces them to also be doing the other stuff. The multiple stations thing, this is the most important thing today, if you're not already doing this, is to try to recruit some coaches or parents that will allow you to run stations of no more than 3 or 4 players. You guys don't have any time to practice. Now, as a high school coach, I say we have no time to practice because we go for 2 or 3 weeks and the season starts these days, right? Those days of overlapping sports by a month are over. So you get like 2 or 3 weeks and you got to be hot. So I feel like we don't have enough time to practice. You guys certainly don't have enough time to practice. I feel like your responsibility around your jobs and your families and everything else you guys got cooking is to try to maximize kids' reps at practice. The number of ground balls, fly balls, cuts that they get, to try to organize the practice so they get as many as they can. And the way to do that is with stations. And so if you guys look at that, I gave you 2 real quick examples. You set up in the right corner for hitting tee or soft toss into a net. I'd set it up in the right-hand corner where people aren't going to be peppering very much, right? If you got a lefty up, you got to time out that station for a minute. I'd set one up over there and I'd face that net the other direction so you're not hitting a ball accidentally this way, obviously. And then you're just having those guys tee off over there. Maybe you send them over here to the cage when you rotate. You got another group that's maybe hitting off of, I think we did shagging, sorry, a group that's shagging. But that's only 3 or 4 kids. So how do I cover that? I get parents. And the parents who tell you I can't do anything, I don't know how to coach, you can pick up a ball and put it in a bucket, right? So those people who are nervous to help you, that's a perfect opportunity. You guys are gonna have a lot of parents sticking around at practices the whole time. Have them, especially during that time, be out there shagging and picking up those balls for you. That way you don't need to have 8 kids there. They're not getting much benefit shagging like that. The other thing I would strongly encourage you to do is to not mix your hitting and your fielding. I see it an awful lot with younger teams that, okay, this is an opportunity for a kid to throw the ball from short to first, and then we wait for 45 seconds. Well, that's all happening, right? Instead of maximizing those reps. When it's time to get hacks, it's time to get hacks. So pick up the ball, put it in the bucket. Don't throw it across and then the kid's not paying attention, he gets hit, or waste our time. We're just gonna maximize our reps. If you wanna have a really fast-paced practice and lots of reps for kids, you need a ton of balls, you need a ton of buckets, so that you're not waiting for one bucket to get run out there by one kid who then has to wait. All the guns are cold, right? Well, that's happening. You got to keep it rolling. So if you're buying them in a garage sale, if you tell all of your parents to go through their garage, and I don't care what they look like, off of the tee they can be missing laces, right? We don't care. A lot of coaches have kids throw. Remember, every time a kid throws, it's not a bad thing, but every time a kid throws, it's swallowing up time. Right? So if you want to maximize ground balls, they don't throw at every station. You get kids over there at shortstop, they're going to throw across to first base, and a parent's going to catch it over there. You can have a kid catch sometimes, but you don't need to do that every single practice. Have a parent over there, and that frees that other kid up to take ground balls. So you hit them over there, and you have 2 bats going. And you got one on this side and one on this side. You hit over to those kids at short, the kids at short throw it to first base. Parent just drops them behind them in the grass. Over at second base, you're hitting ground balls to the kids. After they field them, they just drop them in a bucket behind them. Okay, and if you go to pregame and watch the Rockies, they don't throw every ball across the diamond, right? They take a ton of ground balls. They don't throw them all. They're playing that many games especially, right? You don't throw all those, but you're taking a ton of reps ground ball wise. So I would encourage you to do multiple stations. Most younger teams do not do multiple bat stations because we're afraid of kids killing each other, right? So make it simple by putting a parent out there at first base, and only having one group throw the ball and the other group's not throwing it, you don't need to worry about running 2 or 3 back infield like we will at the high school sometimes. It's probably a little bit too advanced for these guys. And then if you look there, I had 2 outfield stations, and I said throwers, you guys don't need people running fungos, right? You can have a parent just throwing out there. If you got a parent volunteer who will go out there and just throw pop flies at these guys, that's better. A lot of times it's better because they're going to get cleaner reps. If you send somebody out there who can't handle a fungo and they roll over on 20 pitches, it's not helping kids fly balls anyway. If you're saying, I want them to see it off the bat, well, you saw it off the bat, guy roll, you know, I mean, so throw them and let them get some reps out there. And then the other thing I would tell you is you don't always need a person when they're throwing it. If you haven't already figured out that trick, take your bow net, take your L screen, set it up over there and say, all right, boys, we're throwing into the L screen. So they got a target to throw to. You don't have to have anybody over there shagging. I go till the bucket's empty, then they jog in, pick it up at the L screen, and we go again. On the flip side there, you guys, keeping it competitive, but also fun. I love in the summer, I'm a teacher, and so, you know, people are, it must be nice to have your summers off, and the thing that's great about being a teacher and having your summers off is that you can watch afternoon College World Series games, you know. I am locked down when the College World Series comes around. I love that brand of baseball. I love the stories. I love these goofy kids with their weird rituals and all that kind of stuff. Those kids are loving the game because they're playing it at a high level, which I don't think we should ever make apologies for. We want you to play at a high level, right? Even if you're not going to go play on past high school. We want to try to push what you can do in this sport. But we also want to remember that it is a game and that it's supposed to be fun. So figure out ways to teach it that are also fun. I'm not saying just jack around and practice, right? But figure out ways to teach it that the kids are actually going to get into and remember what it was like to be a kid. So one of the things we do toward that end, first of all, I'd have little, you know, the little sunflower seed tubes that you can get for like 50 cents a piece. I'd have those and some gum, bubble tape. Our kids, bubble tape, they'd knock over each other to get to bubble tape. I'd have some of that in my bag all the time. And if you got a kid who every single time without a coach telling him is backing up that throw to first base, when he comes in, give him some bubble tape and call him out in front of the other kids. Don't make a big production of it, right? I'm a big believer that kids hear stuff more when we don't say it really loud. 2 or 3 kids hear it and they all start talking about it, right? So just give them that, tell them, hey, good job. Don't always give it to the kid who went 3 for 4 or the kid who pitched the game. They're going to get that attention and should too. But give attention to those kids who are doing those kind of small things. That keeps it kind of loose and fun. They'll start competing for bubble tape or a pack of seeds, right? All the time. But try to pick stuff instead of, I want you to hit a triple, I'm going to give you a bag of seeds. So I'm going to give a bag of seeds to the guy who has a good read on a fly ball. You know, pick stuff like that instead of just a, hey, you win for hitting it the farthest kind of thing. And that'll get a lot more kids involved, and just switch it up. The other one I love, we stole this from a team in Florida. We went to over spring break one time, went to the Disney World of Sports thing. Anybody been there on a trip? It's like Disney. You know, everything Disney does is just like top notch, great fields, and they drive all your gear down to the field and everything else. But there was this team there, and they were playing this game, and this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Trick them into doing the stuff you want them to do. You have 2 kids on a team, and the 2 kids come over here and they put their hands on, they got to hold over on the backstop there so don't get hit back here. It'd be over there. And a kid steps up and hits the ball. And he hits the ball, coach pitches it. Nobody else is in the outfield. He hits the ball as far as he can, and he tries to run as many bases as he possibly can before the 2 kids, at the moment the ball's hit, sprint to the ball and both touch it. Now the fast kid can't pick it up and run it back to the slow kid. They both have to touch the ball where it lies, right? And so those 2 kids are running as fast as they possibly can to get to the ball. And the kid who gets 1 point for each base he touches before they do is running as fast as he can. We had kids running faster for that game than we did in games. And so they don't realize that you're having them run. I mean, they're over there and then they're ready to go again, right? But there's a balance between having pitchers run foul poles because we know it's good for them and tricking them into doing stuff that we know is good for them like that. And as much of that as we can do, I think these kids are going to appreciate it. Coming back to the College World Series thing, when those kids talk about their coaches, they hardly ever say, coach taught me so-and-so about a pitch, or coach taught me so-and-so about fielding a ground ball. We know they did, right? But what do the kids talk about? They talk about how fun it is to play there. They talk about that relationship they have with that coach coach called them when a family member was killed. Stuff. Those are the stories you hear, right? That's what they're focused on. We get so wrapped up sometimes in my success as a coach is based on how much I teach you about the game that we lose sight of all of the powerful influence and potential we have in those other areas. And whether we like it or not, that's what matters to most of these kids more than the stuff that we think matters to them. One other thing I didn't mention today that I would encourage you guys to do is 4 corners, which is something that Ryan Beavers has done forever. Some of you guys may do it where they just get in groups and throw the ball around the bases and then you go the opposite direction. If you see a team warming up and they're doing that and everybody on the team can throw a ball like that, they're going to be nails. And that, I would walk home by Silver Creek's field. I'd coach with Roger and Roger knew Ryan, and I'd walk by Silver Creek. And Beavers would yell at me to come and coach, and I'd walk by and say, hey, whatever, and it was that finally I was walking by and I saw these girls throwing darts to each other around those bases, and I said, geez, it would be kind of fun to coach those guys. And so that's what talked me into coaching, is to see them do that. I'm telling you right now, have a bucket of balls, because they're the first couple of years, they're gonna throw most of them in the outfield and start close together, but that being able to pivot and throw a baseball accurately like that, that's huge.
So are you just going around, or are you calling the...
No, go around. They just go around. Yep, so I'm going to catch it. The other thing later on it teaches them to do is let the ball travel, right? You come watch the girls at Silver Creek. They square up. The ball's thrown. It's accurate. They turn their hips already. They let the ball travel across their body. They replace and throw, right? So just start getting them throwing the ball, and pretty soon it turns into that.
Do you reverse?
Yep.
As well? So just both ways.
You might not, but initially. But yeah, absolutely. Scoot as close as you need to. But yeah, that was one of the best things that we did with our kids. Any other questions?
Hey, thanks, Jason.
Yeah, you bet. You guys let me know. You bet. Yeah, stick around. Got any questions?